There we go. Hello, everyone. I am Chelsea Ohlemiller, and I am on my very first Facebook Live with Grief and Goodbyes. And I am so incredibly honored to be sharing with you Hope Edelman. And I know all of you already know who she is, and her work is so vibrant and inspiring in your own grief journey. But I want to tell you a little bit about Hope. And most of you guys know she's been writing, speaking, and leading workshops in the bereavement field for more than 25 years. We all know that her book, Motherless Daughters, was a New York Times bestseller, but she has multiple bestsellers. She's been on multiple things worldwide. She's published 6 additional books, and she actually just published her latest in 2020, which hopefully we will talk about because it's incredible. And her work has been translated into 14 languages, published in 11 countries. She is just an incredible encourager and inspiration in our grief journeys. And so I am just so honored to be here with Hope today and to share her words and her expertise with all of you. So welcome, Hope.
Hi, it's so good to be here. I don't think I caught that this was your very first Facebook Live. That's such an honor to be on with you. Thank you.
This is my very first. I've done a couple of Facebook Lives before, but this is the first of the series. And so I would have never imagined when I planned it all that you would be my first guest, but I am just beyond, like, my smile says it all because I'm just so appreciative and honored to have you on here.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, I want to first talk about, most of my followers know your book and your work, but I just want to ask you, you wrote this book, so many years ago, and it was during a time that nobody was talking about grief and bereavement and mourning. And so I would love to know how you got the courage and the vulnerability to share your story and to write about it, because at that time, 25 years ago, no one was doing that. So how did you, lead the way?
My family, like so many families, did not talk about my mom after she died. So there was this fog of silence that permeated the house and the family. And so I just learned not to talk about it, but I was starting to see how it was showing up for me in different ways. And I kept going to the bookstore or the library looking for a book about mother loss and like how it would affect women over time. And all the books were for women who were adults when their moms died. It was almost like there was no acknowledgement that you could be younger than 40, when your mom died. And I was in a graduate writing program at the University of Iowa, and I started writing my story. So I was familiar with telling my own story. I mean, that was the whole ethos of the nonfiction writing program, was to write personal essays and memoir. But I got involved in a portrait class. It's a funny story, actually, and I chose to write a portrait of Bruce Springsteen because his music had been so influential in my adolescence. But in writing about Bruce Springsteen, I couldn't avoid writing about my last high school boyfriend, who was a Springsteen wannabe. And by writing about him, I couldn't avoid writing about the year after my mother died, which was the year I met him. And that led me into writing about my mother's death. And I wrote a magazine article about it that got a lot of attention. And I was really encouraged at that time to write a book proposal, but I didn't know what I was doing. I literally went to the local bookstore and bought a book called How to Write a Book Proposal. And I still recommend that book. I just followed what it told me to do and mailed off the book proposal to a couple of agents in New York. I really was that naive. And so I don't know that it was courage as much as maybe it was desperation or determination to find out why I was the way I was and why some of the other women that I had met along the years who'd lost moms when they were young seemed to be so similar to each other and to me. And that's what launched that book. That was back in the early 1990s. And you're right, no one was really talking about grief, at least not the way we talk about it now. People were talking about grief very much according to the 5-stage model.
Yep.
What therapists were learning in social work school and in counseling programs was that grief occurs in 5 stages. Right. And now we know that it's not nearly that simple. But when Motherless Daughters came out in 1994, I would have had no way of knowing this, but it was part of like a gestalt because grief theory was changing at exactly that time in the early to mid 90s. And people were starting to talk about, no, grief doesn't happen in a linear way. Right. It's kind of circular, or it's, it's just messy and not not straightforward. It doesn't happen in a lockstep fashion. But instead of letting go, this was the big change, the big shift, was instead of letting go of the people that we loved and getting over it or getting past our grief or putting it down, there was a shift to trying to find ways to form new connections to those loved ones and carry them forward. And that's what all the women I was interviewing were telling me they were trying to do, but they didn't have the cultural sanction or support to do it. And that was just starting to happen in the 1990s. And so that book was part of that movement. Though, of course, like I said, I had no idea at the time. I could only see that looking back with 20 years of hindsight.
Right. Well, and how do you, I mean, you could have never, envisioned that, but how do you internalize, that your words and your research and essentially your vulnerability for your grief story would impact as many people as it does? Because your work, and this book, which I'm sure most people have seen, but it has just transformed so many grief groups, speakers everywhere. And so how do you internalize that?
Yeah. Millions of readers, and it created a model in publishing for combining research, interviews, and memoir. Yeah. And it's been continuously out since 1994 with several updates. And I get emails from readers all the time saying your book saved my life. How does it feel? People say to me, how does it feel to be a person who has done that? And I say, it feels like being me. I mean, I'm just me. I'm just a regular person who sits in front of a computer screen most of the time. I'm only wearing a dress today because I have a meeting later. But most of the time, I'm just like in my exercise clothes by myself in an office, And so it just feels like what I do and like me. But once in a while, like if I'm standing in front of hundreds of women, or if I'm like speaking at a luncheon and the women are holding hands and I can feel the energy of their mothers there in that circle, it really overwhelms me and I just start crying.
Yeah.
And it's not like I'm crying because I think I did this. I'm crying because I think my mother's death meant something.
Yes.
Like this wouldn't be happening probably if my mom hadn't died so young.
Yep.
And occasionally now, because you told me earlier that your mother was 57 when she died.
Yep.
I just turned 57 like a week ago.
Oh.
And it's so young.
Yeah.
It really is.
Well, I am happy birthday.
Thank you. And I think about, I have 2 daughters. And so sometimes I think, oh my God, I wrote the book that my daughters are going to read one day. Mm-hmm. And that really kind of knocks me over if I think about it too much. So I don't. I try not to.
Right. Well, and you're exactly right, because I think about that a lot now. People will call me a grief writer. And I was an educator for a very long time. I taught kindergarten, and I never would have, envisioned that this is where I would be writing about my experience. And, it's so bittersweet because just like you said, like, I feel like it is extending my mother's legacy and she's working through me, and helping other people. And, my impact is just minute compared to yours. But even when you just get one person that emails you and says, you wrote today about something I've been trying to tell my family for months. And you just feel like, what I'm doing is purposeful. And my pain, though I don't want it, it's purposeful too.
And that's the essence of post-traumatic growth, which is using trauma or loss as a springboard for some form of growth that either enhances your life or the lives of others. I see in the chat box here, there are several moms here who are about the age of yours. Lauren says her mom was 59. Lauren says that. Lorraine says 58. Lisa says 55. My mother was 42 years old.
Yep.
My mother was so young. It's incredible.
Yeah.
When I was 17, 42 looked really old. And I was like, oh, my mom, she lived a long life. She went to college. She got married. She had children, all these things that seemed so far off for me. But I'm telling you, it is a very, very significant transition to reach and pass the age your mom was when she died. In fact, it's so significant. It's one of the reasons that women come to Motherless Daughters retreats. They travel from all over the world to sit. We're going to be doing live retreats again pretty soon, I hope. They join the Tuesday evening community calls because they're having an upsurgence of grief, because they are experiencing that old loss in a new way by realizing how young their moms were and how much their moms lost out on.
Right.
And they're also realizing, oh my God, I thought she was so old and she really wasn't. And also death anxiety can come up, or health anxiety, thinking my mom died at this age. Am I going to be vulnerable at this age? It's we call it crossing the silent threshold in the Motherless Daughters community. And actually over at the AfterGrief.com, there's a rituals page where a group of motherless daughters, like a task force, co-created a ritual for reaching and passing that age, because there's no culturally sanctioned way to do it.
Right.
And it's not something, most of us hopefully will not pass it until we're in our 70s or 80s. And that might be expected. But I work with women whose moms died at 28 or 35 or 42, like my mom, or 54. And that's really young to imagine departing, the mortal world.
Right.
And it brings up a lot for the daughters. And that's completely normal. It's normal for us.
Right. And and what is normal, but normal for us. And I love that you have all these resources, which we'll talk about later, your Zoom calls and your lives, because you have created this motherless daughter community where people just feel so seen and heard. And usually it's virtual. We've never met, most of these women that are here in the comments and watching, we haven't met, but we feel like we have this bond and we know each other. And it's just a beautiful thing. And it started with your book and it's just continued. And what I love about your book also is that, you can read it one time when your grief is in the first year and then go back to it. I'm almost at year 4 and still find things that are different.
Right.
And, you talk a lot about, new grief and old new grief. And I wanted to know, you've been doing this for over 20 years and grief shows up unexpected all the time. And so even after doing this work for as long as you've done and doing these conferences and these, meetings with these women, do you still have grief that shows up unexpectedly?
Oh, of course. I'm only human. You're talking about, I'm going to pull it from my shelf. You're talking about my newest book, which is the AfterGrief.
Yes.
Right? When you talk about new grief, and new old grief.
Yes.
If your listeners have read Motherless Daughters, this is like Motherless Daughters now for grownups. And I don't mean that you weren't grown up when you read Motherless Daughters. I mean, it's just like the continuation, because it looks at what the long arc of it is going to be like.
Absolutely.
On July 12th, it's the 40th anniversary of my mother's death. I can't believe I can even say that. But yes, of course, I still have moments where it bubbles up for me, where I think, oh my gosh, she didn't get to see her grandchildren who are now, 23 and 19 and have missed out so much. Or my kids will write me, like a Mother's Day card and say, your mom would be so proud of you. And I just, lose it. So yeah, of course there are moments, because I'm human. But the AfterGrief really takes Motherless Daughters further. And it's for anyone who's lost someone in the past. It could be a mother, a father, a sibling. It's for men and women. There are lots of different stories and permutations in there. But it really examines, what does grief look like 20, 30, 40 years later? It's not as raw or fresh or acute as it was in the early phase.
Right.
Turns into something else. And what is that? And let's create a language so that we can discuss that. Let's have a vocabulary so we can talk about it. Because just like you're saying, you can revisit Motherless Daughters at different times in your life. And I do hear that from a lot of readers. I say, the facts of my mother's death are immutable. They are never going to change. She will always have died of breast cancer in 1981 when she was 42 and I was 17. But my relationship to those facts and the way that I perceive them and interpret them has changed so much at different key points over the years. Like I said, when I was 17, I thought she was old and I have to soldier on and adults have to be strong. And it changed, my perspective changed a lot when I started interviewing and meeting women from Motherless Daughters and discovering that we were like a whole tribe who were having similar experiences. It changed a lot when I became a mother at 33 and my mom wasn't there. It changed again at 42 when I reached and passed her age. And now I look back on her as like, she's so young. she's not even a peer to me anymore, really. I mean, she is. I have friends in their 40s, but a much younger peer.
Right.
And so I look back at, how frightened she must have been and how sad that was for, her to have to leave her children. I was thinking more about my experience as a daughter when I was young, not her experience as a mother. And that shifted more when I became a mother myself. So yeah, I hear it from women all the time. I read Motherless Daughters after my mother died, and I just bought the new edition because it's been in several iterations. And I'm having a whole different experience with the book because I understand it in a new way. I hadn't reached those pivotal or transitional moments or milestones in my life yet. And now I see it differently.
Absolutely. And I have to say, I kind of knew the answer that you would say, of course, I'm experiencing, these things again over time. And I wanted everybody that's listening, to hear you say that, because I think sometimes, when people consider you a leader and an inspiration, they forget that you're really going through it just like everybody else. And
Absolutely.
It feels good, as, it feels a comfort to know, okay, she also feels this, even though she's been doing the work for over 20 years. And even though she feels it too,
I mean, it's truth. People think that grief experts somehow have like the answer to how to manage grief. And we don't. We just recognize it maybe more quickly than other people. And we feel it on the spot, like we will let ourselves metabolize it or move through it if we can, because we know how important it is to process it and externalize it. So we do have that, but doesn't mean that we have figured out this, the magic or the secret handshake to never have to experience it or feel it.
Right.
We do. Of course we do, all the time.
Yeah. And one thing, and I've heard you say it before, and I actually have it on a Post-it note in my office, about how you say, the facts of your mother's death and everything that happened. Like for me, I was in my 30s, my mother was 57. Those things are always a constant, but how I relate to those things is so different. And when the first time I ever heard you say that, it really just was like one of those eye-opening moments.
Right.
And you realize, okay, this is why my grief is constantly changing and constantly changing me, because those facts are the same, but everything around us continues to move and change and evolve.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. And your relationship, to those facts is what changes. And that's a choice, because you may not have had any choice over when or how your mother died. And helplessness is part of that really acute phase of grief too, and sense of injustice. But over time, we do have choice about how we're going to interpret it and what kind of meaning we're going to make out of it. And the more time that elapses, I feel, the more choice we have. And sometimes, we need some help reframing. We do a lot of that at the Motherless Daughters retreats, actually. We do reframing. We look at, what do we feel our weaknesses are as a result of having lost our mothers? How are can those also be perceived as our greatest strengths? Design thinking and so reframing our stories and revising or creating alternative narratives that are equally true is often a very empowering experience, because the material is there. It's just a matter of connecting the dots over time and saying, yes, I was a victim of my mother's death, and my life has been hard ever since, but I've also survived some really bad shit.
Absolutely.
And here's examples of that over time. And then you're creating an empowering narrative that doesn't cancel out the other one. They can exist side by side and be equally true. It just balances each other out.
Yes, absolutely. And stemming off of that, you talk about, grief work and how it's important. And what would you say if, for people that are grieving, whether it's a mother or anybody, what would you say is important grief work to do to kind of move through and move forward with your life and your emotions and your path?
Well, that's a big question, and it's so individual, right? Because everyone's circumstances are so individual. I mean, sort of like my knee-jerk reaction is to say we need to recognize that grief has to be honored.
Absolutely.
We need to externalize it, whether it's through, physical exercise or talking to someone or creating art or whatever it is, in whatever way is meaningful to you. But I also want to acknowledge that there are certain people who cannot attend to their grief right away.
Yep.
Maybe they, can't take time off of a job, or survival needs are taking precedence, or they have children to take care of.
Absolutely.
And they have to put their own needs on hold. for a while, and that's okay too.
Right.
I think the message that I would send is that your grief is going to be as individual as your thumbprint. And just to try to get in touch with what feels right for you at that moment. If you dip in and it feels too intense and you have to come back out, that's okay. That's a self-protective mechanism. If you discover over time that you're not allowing yourself to feel any of the pain, that you really think, well, I'm starting to be avoidant, then professional help, with a trained grief counselor. A couple of sessions can be enormously helpful, or support groups if they exist in your community, or Motherless Daughters, any of the Motherless Daughters resources that exist as we're building out the program now. But it's really just to be kind to yourself and say, my grief isn't going to look like anyone else's grief. It's not going to look like my siblings. It's not going to look like my spouses. It's not going to look like my friends. And I give you permission to anyone who tells you how you should be grieving to tell them that they just don't understand and they need to be quiet.
Yep.
Go talk to the hand or talk to somebody else.
Right.
Anyone who tries to tell you what your grief should look like is really only saying, I'm uncomfortable with the way that you're acting, and I want you to change your behavior so I don't have to feel uncomfortable. And I recommend either, if you'd like to try to educate them just by saying that's not how it works for me, grief is very individual, or just extricating yourself, because you don't need people like that in your life when you're trying to figure out how to live in the world without somebody that you love.
Absolutely. Well, and one of the best things that hopefully everybody will tune into is that I will post Hope's all of her social media and her website, because like she said, she has these retreats. She has weekly Zoom calls that she offers for Motherless Daughters, which, just like she said, is just this tribe of women that she's supporting, and that you're getting time to really discuss all those intricate details of your grief with people that understand. And so Hope has been
those quotes are incredible. If I could just add, they're every Tuesday evening, 5 p.m. California time, 8 p.m. East Coast time. We have women in Germany who wait up until 2 a.m. to be on the calls. We have we have 2 women who come from Australia, one who comes from Chile, all over Canada, because they just want to be in the presence of other women who understand. But they pick the discussion topics. So every month we're having themed discussions around subjects that the women want to talk about, which is really unusual for a support group, I think. So It's not your regular, it's not really a support group. It's more like just joining the community for an hour and a half every Tuesday.
Absolutely. And Hope was so kind to give everybody a discount. And so I will put that in the comments, but it's just FB10. And if you do that, you can have a significant discount on your first month of those Zoom calls with that great community that she has. And so I will put all of this information in the comments section for all of you. But she has multiple books that you can look at your own leisure, and retreats and Zoom calls, and just a brilliant community that's so supportive of this, unique grief journey that we have. So I just really want to thank you for being here today. And do you have anything left you want to say before we sign off?
No, I'm reading the comments sort of as they come on. I'm trying to, and Sarah says, my family tried to tell me there's a time limit and I should let it go by now. That's, I think, Sarah, because your family wishes there were a time limit, or wants there to be a time limit, or wants to not see you be in pain or suffer. Sometimes it's an altruistic impulse, but there's no time limit on grief. It just gets different.
Yep. Which kind of mimics what Mel said. She said, I have people tell me that I'm stuck in my grief.
Right. A big reason why women come to the retreats also is because they are feeling stuck, and they're not sure why, and they want to get unstuck. And what I find is that over the long term, people often feel stuck because the coping skills or strategies that they develop to get through a tough time, that got them through that tough time, have stopped working later down the road, but they don't know how to let go of it or what to replace it with. And so they might need some help with that. But oftentimes what I find is that it's often men telling women they seem stuck in their grief, because we're still willing to share, or brave enough to be vulnerable in the presence of others and say, this still hurts me. I love this person, and I'm still sad that they're not here. But there are certain, exercises or tasks that we can engage in that help make that person be more of a presence and less than an absence. Of course, it's not as good as having them in the physical world. Nothing is, but it does help us feel better and help us feel like we can start wiggling some of those stuck pieces a bit.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And want to say on behalf of myself and everybody that is, on my page and my followers, that we just really have used your words as kind of a guide and an inspiration. And I just thank you for, all those years ago, you having the ability to share it with everybody, because it's really just become something so beautiful. And it's no doubt a legacy of your mother, but of yourself too one day.
Thank you so much. And I want to send a big heart to Aubin in the comments, who said that her mom just passed 2 weeks ago and she's having a really hard time because she's got an infant at home. And Aubin, you're going through a really hard time right now. 2 weeks is almost nothing. And there's almost nothing we can do right now except send you love and support and sit in solidarity and say, we know it's hard, and hold some space for it to be hard for you, and let you know that it will become different. And yeah, you have no time to yourself. You have an 8-week-old baby. If you have to put your grief on hold for a while to tend to your child, that's okay. Lots of us have had to do that, and we've turned out okay.
Yes. Oh, well, and Aubin, I will tell you, if you do not have this book, message me, because I will send you a copy on me, because you're going to need something. And if you don't want to share it, it's so fresh, but you will have a copy of this book on me. So let me know if you don't have it yet. So thank you. And we're just going to lift up everybody that is in our shoes and has a story that's similar to ours. And we're all in this together, guys. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Chelsea.